Thanks, Mark. It's always wonderful to be here with all of you and to connect in this way. Feeling deeply grateful for this opportunity. And I also pray that the teaching and practice that we undertake today will really carry forth the spirit of Rachel Cowan's work of being willing to look at what's painful in the world and respond compassionately. We are going to be exploring today two types of forgetfulness. Some of us may be aware of the fact that the word mindfulness is a translation originally of the Pali word sati, S-A-T-I in English, or smriti. I apologize. Sati is the Sanskrit, and smriti is the Pali, which really just means remembrance. So mindfulness is a kind of remembrance, a kind of remembering to pay attention in a certain way, moment by moment. And also remembering to pay attention in that way in the future. And also calling the past to memory in such a way as to come into a different kind of relationship with our experience in the present moment. People often say that mindfulness is about being present. That's certainly true, right? But there are also these dimensions of remembrance that take us into the past or project into the future, as well as remembering to be present here and now, that are part and parcel of the practice. And to help us flesh out the two types of forgetfulness, and therefore the kind of remembrance that we're going to be cultivating in response to each, I want to invite Adi to please share with us today's text sheet and project that up on the screen here. I believe the link for that is also available in the chat if you'd like to download it and view your own copy. But we are going to be looking at one tiny little verse from the culmination of this week's Torah portion that's coming up, Vayeshev. This is the portion in which the Joseph narratives begin. And I believe probably many of us know the story of Joseph's sale into servitude by his brothers who were jealous of him for being the favorite, and his eventual journey into the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife, makes advances, and he refuses her advances, but then she accuses him of trying to essentially rape her, and he gets put into jail. And in jail, he encounters the chief butler and baker of Pharaoh, and both of them have dreams. And Joseph interprets their dreams and forecasts that the baker will be hanged in 3 days, and that the chief cupbearer, that is the butler, will be restored to his post. And in fact, that's what happens. And Joseph asks the cupbearer before he leaves prison to remember him to Pharaoh. And the culminating verse of our Torah portion reads, "Velo zachar sar hamashkim et Yosef vayishkachehu." The chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he forgot him. So this seems a little bit redundant, right? Obviously, if the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, then he forgot him. And the question is, why emphasize that he forgot Joseph, that the cupbearer forgot Joseph? And I think that what the verse is trying to point to here is that there are two types of forgetfulness. Right? The first type of forgetfulness that we're very familiar with from our practice is when our mind simply, out of habit, forgets what we had intended to pay attention to, and it goes wandering off somewhere else. Right? And that's not all too different from the experience of having the intention to grab your car keys, and then you walk out the door, and then you get to your car and you realize, I forgot my car keys, right? Your mind essentially became preoccupied with something else, and as such, you forgot. Okay. And the way we work with that kind of forgetfulness in our practice is that we train the mind little by little by little to remember our intention, which is very, very simple and straightforward. And over time, and I'm speaking here from personal experience, we can actually train the mind to remember our intention to such a degree that we can stay focused moment by moment by moment on what we had hoped to focus on for longer and longer periods of time, without the mind wandering off or forgetting what it had intended to pay attention to. So that's what we do whenever we come back in our practice to our object of focus, and so on and so forth. But the verse is trying to point to a different type of forgetfulness. And that is a kind of willful forgetfulness, which is to say that, the cupbearer in remembering Joseph would also have to remember the traumatic experience of being imprisoned and having, feared for his life in jail, not knowing what his future would be. And in some ways, coming to terms with an inconvenient truth about his past. And when we human beings, certainly I speak for myself here, when I have the experience of having to face something painful about myself or about the world, I can find myself engaged in a kind of willful, intentional turning away from, right? Or kind of willful forgetfulness. And my sense is that's what happened here. It was too painful for the cupbearer to bring Joseph to mind, because then he would have had to confront his difficult past, his painful past. So he essentially put him out of mind, right? And in so doing, forgot him. This is a very different type of forgetfulness, very different type of forgetfulness. And, I see this happening in myself all the time. Not only in relation to inconvenient truths about myself from my past, misdeeds, unskillful actions, unwholesome words that I may have said to this person or that person, things I did when I was younger and I didn't have as much wisdom or clarity about what brings happiness as I do now, and so on and so forth. But this is also true on the communal level in our world today, that maybe we listen to the news and we hear about something painful related to climate change, or something that maybe highlights our own privilege, right? And I'm saying that, as a cis, white, highly educated, straight male, and as such a person who has a lot of privilege, maybe we hear something on the news or read something or become aware of our privilege and the ways in which it may have come on the backs of others who are less privileged. And it's painful. It hurts, right? And just the other day, I noticed myself feeling that pain for a moment and then turning away, right? My mind, as it were, chose another object of attention, something that was more neutral, something that enabled me to feel distracted in some way so that I didn't have to confront what was difficult and painful in the world and the ways in which that pain is manifest in my own heart, body, and mind. So one thing we do in practice, another kind of remembrance that we cultivate, is the remembrance of paying attention to what's painful and difficult and inconvenient, right? And things we'd rather not see. So what I'd like to invite us to do today, and Adi, you can stop the screen share and we'll come back to that just at the end of the session, is really sit for a little bit and cultivate the first kind of remembrance to counteract the first kind of forgetfulness, right? So we sit, we hold our object of attention and focus. and the mind wanders off and it goes looking for something else, perhaps more stimulating or what have you. And then when we notice that, we just gently come back again and again and again, and we remember our intention, right? And over time, the mind settles a little bit more and we can become a little bit more focused and sustain our attention for a little bit longer. But then we might also notice that something inconvenient, unpleasant, or difficult in us, or perhaps something about the world around us, may arise. And we can just notice ever so gently, with clarity and tremendous self compassion, the mind's natural tendency to want to move toward that willful kind of ignorance. And I want to invite you to see if instead of giving in to that tendency, can you stay? Can you just stay with love, with compassion, with awareness, with a kind of vivid quality of attention that can stay with in a kind of equanimity, looking, not ducking, as our teacher Sylvia Boorstein says, right? Don't duck. So let's take a moment to settle into our posture, seated, relaxed, making any final adjustments so that we can feel ourselves comfortable in our seat and remain relatively still. And maybe let's take the first 5 minutes to allow our attention to alight on a particular object in the body in the present moment, setting our intention to stay and to come back when we notice our mind wandering. That could be the breath, could be the feeling of contact between your chair and its support, between your body and its support. Could be sounds. Choose one. There's no best, only what works for you and helps you feel present and sustained here and now. Eyes can be open or closed, whichever feels more supportive and regulating. And let's sit like that for about 5 minutes, practicing this first kind of remembrance. Just remembering to pay attention here and now. And remembering to do so in the next moment, and the next moment, and the next moment. Continue in this vein. Perhaps at some point, a thought, an image, a feeling may arise, a sensation that may be inconvenient, even painful. There's no mistake here. Nothing's wrong when that happens. It's just life, life arising in the mind. This is our conditioning. And you may notice a tendency to want to look away. You may notice the mind developing all kinds of very smart strategies for not having to abide with and see and look head on. Maybe something inconvenient or unpleasant within yourself. It may be something about the world. You can welcome the mind's tendency to look away. You can say, thank you. I know you're trying to keep me safe, but it's okay. I have the capacity to stay here with what's difficult and unpleasant. Awareness can hold it with love, with curiosity, with compassion. You may notice what may change, if anything, as a result of just staying, looking, being with, befriending, allowing. Please feel free to keep your eyes closed if they've been closed to continue the meditation. Adi, if you would mind pulling up that screen share one more time for my benefit. I want to conclude with a short reading from Erica Brown, contemporary teacher. Suffering humanizes us. Ignoring suffering dehumanizes us. I don't want to ruin my good mood by looking at that homeless person, so I turn away. And with that turning, I let go of my social responsibility to him. Attunement to suffering makes us more compassionate. It also helps us appreciate where we come from and all that it took to get us where we are. We have to remind ourselves that we don't diminish our happiness when we spend a day or a few weeks meditating on the tragedies of history from which we emerged. We become more grateful, holding on tightly to our blessed lives because we can. And with that, I want to invite you to bring the meditation to a close, and we'll turn to Rabbi Mark for Kaddish.
Thank you, Sam. Friends, we seal our practice as we do every day by offering an opportunity for those observing yahrzeit, or if you're in mourning, or if it's simply your custom to participate in Kaddish, to join in the recitation of Kaddish. I invite you to share name or names of those you're holding in your heart today in the chat box, either now or after we recite Kaddish. And for those who are not doing so, you're here to be compassionate, supportive, loving presence for those who are invited to rise in body or in spirit. Yid Gadal, Yid Kadash, Shemei Rabbi. Yalma Divra Chirute, Yamlich Malchute, Bechayechon, Yomechon,
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Aye, Techol Beit
ועלמה דברה
Yisrael,
פירוטי וימליך
Bagala,
מלכותי.
Bizman Karim,
בחייכון וביומכון ובחי לכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו
Shmei
אמן.
Rabba, Mevarach, Le'olam,
שמי רבה
Maya,
מבורך לעולם ועל מי על מיה.
Yitbarach,
יתברך
Yishtabach,
וישתבח
Yitpa'ar,
ויתפאר ויתרומם
Yitromam,
ויתנשא
Yitnaseh,
ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה ושמי
Yitadar,
לקדושה ברכו.
Yit'aleh, Yit'allah, Shemei,
אלהם עם כל
Kedusha,
ברכתה ושיר
Berichu,
את תוספתה ויחודה
Le'elam,
והנמדה
Kol
ממנו מעלמה
Birchatecha,
ואמרו אמן.
Shirata, Tushbechata,
מה רבה
Benechamacha,
מן שמיים שמיים
Amiran
עלינו ועל
Ba'alma,
כל ישראל
V'imru,
ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Yehi Shalom Rabba,
שלום
Kum
המעורב
Shemayim,
ויעשה שלום
Ani
עלינו ועל
Aleinu
כל
V'al
ישראל
Yisrael, V'imru, Amen.
ואמרו
Ose
אמן.
Shalom Birama, Hu Yachach Shalom, V'yim V'al Kol Yisrael, V'al Kol Yosvei Teva, V'imru, Amen. Thanks for joining us today, as always. If you're leaving us at this point, we hope you'll join us tomorrow to sit with Cantor Heather Batchelor, who'll be leading us. And on Wednesday, Reb Brian Yosef Schachter Brooks will lead us. Just a reminder that we will not be meeting live on Thursday or Friday in observance of Thanksgiving. But just a reminder, of course, that you can always revisit this and all the meditations in this series on our YouTube channel. We want to extend gratitude to Lynn Fine, Sherry Froelich, and Adrienne Bank, who sponsored our practice today in memory of their beloved mother, Leonore Fine, Zichronah Libracha. May her memory be a blessing. Thank you so much, Lynn, Sherry, and Adrienne. And of course, we want to thank our teacher, Rabbi Sam Feinsmith, for today's gorgeous teaching on forgetfulness and remembrance, and looking forward to unpacking that teaching and extending it into our day. Some conversation with Sam in a moment. And of course, as always, thanks to Adi Stein for holding our Tech Mishkan, our sanctuary, that our container for this opportunity to practice together, for holding that with grace and skill. If you have a question for Sam, please put it in the chat box. If you have an observation, put it in the chat box. If it's a question, if you could, preface it by just write a question in all caps. Sam, that was clear, gorgeous, as always. I don't want to exclude people who were not around for your week-long immersion, but I would like to tie it together a little bit with that teaching from a few weeks back. And of course, that's still very much with me, and as it is, I'm sure, with a lot of people here. But I want to also just first begin by clarifying the distinction between the two kinds of forgetfulness, right? Which seem very similar to me, maybe different in degree. I don't know. Like, I'm curious to hear what you say about that. Like, first, forgetfulness is that like you said, the everyday example of forgetting the keys, which I don't know. I guess I can relate to that one, which is we get distracted by something else, maybe that captures our interest more. But still comes down to, it's kind of boring to remember, right? There's something about where the mind is actively searching to be engaged in something new all the time. And so because of that, it has its own momentum. And so we lose track, as it were, I think, of what we're trying to remember. It's like that first kind of forgetfulness. But to some extent, it feels like there's something undesirable about remembering that, even though it's fairly neutral. It's not something particularly unpleasant. In fact, I'm motivated to remember where my keys are and that I have my keys, but it's not, it's not exciting to remember that. So there's a little bit of boredom. I would associate a little bit of boredom / unpleasantness. Whereas the second one, which is much more challenging, is when it's something that is clearly unpleasant to remember, that we maybe subconsciously turn away from it, or unconsciously, subconsciously, sometimes maybe even intentionally choose to turn away from it, as you said. So I got that. Does that distinction sound right that you're making?
It does. I just want to offer one expansion on what you offered around the first type of forgetfulness. It could be that the mind is bored, but as Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, one of my Rebbes and teachers of blessed memory, said, the mind is like tofu. So it takes on the flavor of whatever you soak it in. And it could be that I'm bored, which is why, my mind goes to another thought, like, let me check the news, or, grab something to eat, or check that item off my to-do list, or whatever the case may be. But it's also entirely possible that the mind is just going where it's conditioned to go, right? And so if let's say we've been soaking our mind in the marinade of multitasking, for the last 2 hours. We sit down to meditate, and the mind is just used to multitasking because we've been conditioning it to do that, right? It's been in the marinade of multitasking. So it'll just jump from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, right? Not necessarily because we're bored. It's just a habit, right? So I just want to expand upon what you said. It's one of the reasons why it's very important when we're not meditating to be mindful of the habits of mind that we're cultivating, right? Because you can't expect to sit down on the cushion and suddenly be super focused and clear and vivid, right? And penetrate into the nature of phenomena if the rest of the time you're just letting your mind kind of soak in a marinade of distractibility, impulsivity, impatience, anger, lust, whatever it is, right? So that's why it's important, to live a life of mindfulness, and not just, come to mindfulness on the cushion. But what I would also say is that first type of remembrance, which is to say, when we cultivate the ability to stay here and now, right, moment by moment, it begins to prepare us for the second kind of remembrance, right? Because I'll give a concrete example that illustrates this. Learning to stay with the breath in all of its dimensions. Sometimes the breath is pleasant, sometimes it's unpleasant, sometimes it's neutral, right? Learning just to stay, right? It then prepares us to be able to lean into our other kinds of experiences, no matter their kind of contour or valence, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, right? So that happened to me, for example, many years ago when I was just getting started. I would go to these New York Insight meditation sessions every Tuesday night near where my rabbinical school was in New York. And, I'm a pretty dutiful student. So they would say, sit, on the cushion and just watch your breath. And when your mind wanders off, come back, no matter how many times you have to. And those were long sessions. They were about 45 minutes for a beginner. That can feel like an eternity, but I was very dutiful and I would do it, and my knees would be killing me and my back would be killing me and my mind would wander hither and yon, but I would keep coming back, and I would feel relaxed afterwards and really proud of myself for having done it, but I didn't recognize that what I was doing internally was actually repatterning my relationship with how I approached all flavors of experience. Because then what happened a number of months later is that I ended up in really, really bad pain that, Mark, I've told you about on multiple occasions. I'm happy to tell more if people are interested in that, but really excruciating pain. And I was sitting there one morning on a Sunday morning meditating on my own, and the pain was absolutely excruciating, right? Like a 10 out of 10, 10 being the most painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. And suddenly, because I'd been doing that work on the cushion with the breath, I was able to approach the pain and say, oh, okay, I have every reason to believe you're going to stick around for a while, right? Why don't you stay here and be my teacher? And when that happened, the pain, it's not that the pain went away, but suddenly it was floating in this infinite expanse of awareness from which, right, I could see that actually it wasn't such a hard, edgy thing. It was more like very dynamic, right? It was like pulsing and letting go and pulsing and letting go. And then it felt like I could stay there with it forever. It was no longer afflictive, even though it was still painful. Right. So all I'm saying is that when we cultivate that first kind of remembrance, which helps us to develop this kind of ability to stay present, even if our object is just the breath, that then aids in our capacity to cultivate the second type of remembrance, right? Remembering to stay with even when things are unpleasant or difficult or neutral or boring, right? Or heartbreaking or whatever the case may be.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that and being willing to share that personal example. And I see there are a lot of really good questions that go to, we said one is just about, one is the question, Laura's question, what are your thoughts on how much and how long to stay with the painful or inconvenient truths? Is this the opposite of compartmentalizing, a skill that's recommended by many today, it's a great question. And then another question, which really we have to get to, which has to do with trauma. When actually it may be too much to bear, right? Or unhealthy or unwholesome or potentially destructive to get into that kind of remembrance. So
yeah,
a lot there to unpack in
phenomenal questions. So the short answer is baby steps, right? Mm-hmm. You can't open the door and let it all in right away. Because you'll get flooded. And, the problem with allowing ourselves to get flooded is that we end up either becoming reactive or paralyzed, right? We go into flight or fight mode or even freeze mode, right? And then we can't actually engage with the suffering in any kind of a constructive way. Right. So in my experience, I've developed more of a capacity over time and, really taking baby steps and working with small things. Like at first, I remember the first silent meditation retreat I went on, I watched for the first time in my whole life, right? I was like 26 or something. And can you believe it? I went 26 years without doing this. And it was amazing. I watched an itch from its very beginning until its very conclusion, right? Maybe, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, that was really difficult, but that's a small thing, and that was my first baby step toward being able to sit with the unpleasant, with the that which is difficult, that which your mind says, this will kill you if you stay with it, right? My mind literally said, if I don't scratch this, I'm going to die, which is patently untrue, right? And then over time, you start working with, small pains in the body, and then maybe some difficult emotion arises, but not the most difficult, painful emotion you ever had. And you kind of approach it a little bit and you see what that's like. And if it becomes too intense, you back off and you come back into something more neutral and sustaining, be it the breath or the feeling of contact between your body and its support. Or maybe you go for a little walk, you take a little mindful walk, or you go outside and you look at the trees, right? And you help yourself to kind of come back to a baseline of regulation, you know. And then over time, I can tell you, you know, my window of tolerance, my capacity to be able to tolerate a lot more unpleasant things like, you know, rage or, you know, intense craving, you know, or heartbreak, deep heartbreak, or grief when my father died, right? Those kinds of things can arise, and it's fine. It's okay, you know, and you can welcome them in. And part of that has to do with the fact that we begin to realize that our awareness is vast and can hold anything without becoming overwhelmed, right? That having been said, I'll tell you that I still find myself, you know, when it comes to these big, intractable problems in the world, like climate change, you know, I lean in, and at some point I need to pull back. And that's a function on some level of my privilege, right? There are people who don't have that option, you know, and I can step away, you know, into the safety of my own kind of 4 cubits, as it were, and into the safety of my own privilege, you know. But that's a good growing edge for me to be able to notice, you know, where is my window of tolerance? You know, when have I gone too far? So you kind of can only learn about that by going a little bit too far, right? And getting burned a little bit. And then you recognize, oh, wait, I'm not quite ready to go that far yet. In terms of the trauma piece, there are really important modifications that we can learn about. And I offered some of them here today when I gave instructions to help us stay within our window of tolerance, because the problem with the trauma is that, you know, when we start turning toward body sensations and mindfulness, trauma lives in the body, right? The body keeps the score. And sometimes sensations of trauma can then trigger, you know, really unpleasant feelings and difficult memories that can, in some ways, kind of put us there and then again. So we want to know how to kind of pull ourselves back into here and now, you know, and stay within choice so that we don't have to go too quickly toward traumatic feelings and memories. Eventually, over time, we can grow in our capacity to integrate those into our awareness, and that can be profoundly healing, you know. But at first, it's really important for us to be able to know, oh, look at that, I'm getting a little too close, right? Let me pull back a little bit or redirect my attention elsewhere. So for example, you know, you may not want to meditate with your eyes closed if you're a trauma survivor, because maybe when you close your eyes, you'll, you know, flashes of a painful traumatic memory may arise. And then over time, maybe you'll grow in your ability to be able to hold those kinds of thoughts without being flooded by them, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe instead of focusing on your core, where some traumatic feelings are held, many often are held at our core, you may want to focus on your extremities, right? And you can get very concentrated and very focused and very clear just by focusing on sensations in your fingertips or in your toes, you know, or at the top of your head or what have you. So these are just a couple of small examples of modifications that we can adopt to keep ourselves feeling safe and regulated in our practice. And maybe at some point we'll create, you know, a trauma-sensitive mindfulness course, you know, with a Jewish framing for people who are trauma survivors or who want to know more about that. But I would highly recommend a book by David Tree-Levin called Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness for anyone who's interested in this topic, either for themselves or in supporting others. I'm just going to put that in the chat right here. The name of the author is David Tree-Levin, and the book is Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness. He also has a great website with a lot of really helpful resources.
That was a wonderful answer, Sam. Thank you. So we have a minute. Maybe just to end with this, which is a little bit of a segue into our December 5th extended period of practice on compassion, which is when you were I can't remember which forgetfulness mode this was, but you were you were articulating what we could say to the part of our mind that's saying, you know, I can't handle this, or this is too unpleasant, I want to look away. And then to say, it's okay, I can be with this, right? I can be with this, I can tolerate this.
Yeah. Although that's the second step, because first we really need to honor and respect the resistance, you know, because it's coming from a good place. Right. It's
to protect. I know, like, I think you said that. You said, I know you're trying to protect me. Right. Thank you for trying to protect me. Right now I'm okay, you know. No thanks, but no thanks. But the piece that's there that we'll leave hanging for now, but which I want to invite people to come on December 5th, has to do with compassion, which you also alluded to there, is that not only can I become aware of that suffering or the injustice or that which is painful, that which I'd rather not remember on some level, is that it can, by cultivating our ability to be with it, that can evoke the compassion or capacity for compassion, which is there. And as you've taught beautifully in the past, is part and parcel of awareness, of the light of awareness, right? Which is basically the principle of the theme of our retreat on December 5th. So I want to encourage people to sign up and join us for the next installment in this beautiful teaching. And we have to leave it there, Sam. Thank you so much, as always. Really, it's just a big blessing to have you as our teacher, sit in the teacher's chair. So thanks to Adi, thanks to our trio of sponsors for today. Lynn, I have to scroll up. Lynn, Sherry, and Adrian, thank you so much for sponsoring this beautiful sit today. Thanks to Adi, and hope to see you all tomorrow to practice with Cantor Heather Bachelor at this usual time. Be well, everyone.
Thanks, friends. Thanks, Mark. Take good care.